If you're anything like me, then you still very much enjoy collecting physical video games. Ever since I was a kid, I've loved the feeling of cracking open a highly anticipated game and having a new piece of my collection added to the shelf. It's still a huge part of the game buying experience for me personally, but I am part of an increasingly rare group. As most gamers move towards all digital, publishers have taken notice. And with that has come the steadily declining state of physical video games over the last 5 to 10 years. In this video, I want to take a look at some examples of how bad things have gotten, and get into why this is an issue that should be on your radar even if you don't typically care about physical video games. The deterioration of physical games has been a slow burn. The first signs of it came during the PS3 and 360 generation, when full games were able to be purchased digitally on console for the first time. It was a pretty cool new option, and some people immediately made the swap, but for most, physical video games were still the way to go. But as we moved into the PS4 and Xbox One generation, digital games became a lot more feasible. These consoles had far greater storage available on them than their predecessors, faster download speeds, and much needed improvements to the overall online store experiences. And so now, the idea of downloading full games wasn't nearly as daunting as before. A lot of players were understandably attracted to the new convenience of digital downloads and began to make the switch, building all digital libraries throughout the 8th generation of consoles. With that, the concessions within physical video games began. The first hit came to the instruction manuals, which began disappearing right around this same time. Now personally, I'm not as much of a stickler about manuals as a lot of collectors are. I'm usually not that concerned about if a game has it or not, and don't really want to pay a premium for it. At the end of the day, I'm only seeing the spine of my games 99% of the time anyway, so I'm not as worried about having the manual or every little slip of paper that originally came with it. I know that's not super common amongst collectors, but that's how I feel. Regardless though, it still really hurt to see manuals go. I'm sure a lot of you can relate to the childhood memories of getting a new game at the store and reading the manual on the car drive home, or bringing them with you somewhere to flip through and pass the time. It was always fun to see the artwork or little details that often went into these booklets. Were they useless most of the time? Sure. Do I really need a packet telling me to use the D-pad to move my character in Mario? Not really, but it was a nice detail and one that added a lot of character to the games you bought. But as we moved into the 2010s, it became increasingly rare to get a manual with your game. There was a spin from the companies on this that it was being done to save paper, and while that may be true, it was also pretty clearly a cost-cutting measure, both in terms of printing costs and the manpower to create them. Many people were very upset to see manuals go, but with so many more having gone all digital anyway, the pushback wasn't strong enough to make a legitimate difference, and before you knew it, you would almost never see a manual present in any physical video game you bought. I know a lot of you probably don't care about these, and like I said, I don't really either, but it's worth noting because it was the first sign that companies were starting to sour on the process of physical games, and it was the first sign that consumers weren't too worried about it for the most part. And that is what opened the floodgates to what we have today. The 2020s have seen digital games become the de facto purchase method for a large majority of people. There are less gamers buying physical games than ever before, and with that, companies have begun towing the line to see what they can get away with. All three console manufacturers have had moments like this recently. For example, on PlayStation 5, you will sometimes come across discs without any actual data present. The only purpose of this disc is to trigger a download on your system. There are quite a few games that do this, but my favorite representation of the absurdity will always be the Call of Duty games. Call of Duty Modern Warfare 2 takes up a staggering 130 gigabytes of space on PlayStation 5, but the disc itself, there is only 70 megabytes of data. 70 megabytes. I am not even joking when I say that might be like the title screen PNG and nothing else. This may as well be an empty disc. And the part that I find most concerning about this is that they don't even really tell you this is the case. Yes, there is this tiny little disclaimer saying requires download, but I don't think the average person is going to assume that means the entire game needs to be downloaded. Most probably think it's just talking about updates or some additional content that needs to be downloaded, not the full game. We'll talk about Nintendo's game keycards in a bit, which they are rightfully getting ripped for, but to me, these blank discs are even worse, because these basically are the exact same as game keycards. The only difference is they are not as obviously marked. Say what you will about Nintendo and their keycards, but at least they don't try to mislead you and hope you don't notice like these games do. To be fair, these Datalless discs are relatively rare to see on the platform, but it happens enough that it's become a pretty serious problem that you need to look out for when shopping for new games. Another serious problem you will need to look out for is newer PlayStation 5 models having no disk drive at all. This generation introduced a digital version of the PS5 which was slightly cheaper, but had no disk drive. Although this was certainly another hit to the future of physicals, I wasn't that upset about it since it was just an option, and a totally normal disc version was still available. However, with the PlayStation 5 Pro, the only model of that device is strictly digital. If you want a disk drive, you need to buy it as a separate attachment. And it's a pretty expensive attachment too. Actually, just a few weeks ago, I was debating buying a PS5 Pro because it was on sale, and with the rising cost of everything, that sale price was probably the cheapest it is ever going to be. But then I remembered I would need to spend $80 on a disk drive to avoid being locked out of my 100 plus physical PS4 and 5 games, and wouldn't you know it, just like that, there was no savings at all. It really did turn me off on the whole idea of the upgrade, and has me worried for the probable inevitability of PlayStation 6 being digital only with a similar disk drive peripheral. On the other side, you have Xbox, who went even more all in on digital this generation. The Series X is your typical console, but the Series S is a cheaper, slightly less powerful alternative that also has no disk drive and is digital only. With the Series S and Xbox's focus on Game Pass, they have gotten pretty stingy with their physical games. One of the weirder examples from the big three came from Xbox Game Studios earlier this year, when some of their upcoming games went up for pre-order. As you all probably know, many Xbox first-party games are now coming to other platforms as well, such as PlayStation 5. Two such games are Ninja Gaiden 4 and The Outer Worlds 2. But when their physical versions went live, fans immediately noticed something strange. The PS5 versions of the game would be on a traditional disc, while the Xbox version would be just a download code in a box with no actual physical disc at all. A code in a box game is quite literally an empty plastic case with a slip of paper in it. There's no physical disc, no chance of preservation, and zero actual ownership. And once that code is claimed, it's over. You can't sell this game or lend it to a friend, it's just a paperweight, lacking any of the typical benefits that come from buying a game physically. Not to mention, it's an insane waste of plastic. It's lazy, greedy, and an obvious attempt to capitalize on the benefits of a physical store presence without going through any of the actual work or effort required. The Xbox situation is even weirder because PlayStation players would seemingly be getting a normal disc. So somehow, despite being made by Xbox, the actual Xbox version of the game would get no disc, while their competitor would. It's super bizarre. Xbox has reversed this decision, now stating these two games will come on a traditional disc. But with so many Xbox games now ditching physical entirely, it seems like Microsoft is pretty much ready to drop it. I would not be surprised to see the next Xbox be fully all digital, without even an option for a disc drive. As for Nintendo, things are very bad right now as well. Yes, it's finally time to talk about Switch 2 keycards, the very hot topic in the physical games world right now. Similar to the PS5 discs we mentioned earlier, a Switch 2 keycard is just a license to the game. There is no actual data on the cartridge itself. It's nothing more than a trigger for a download that starts on your system. Now I have to be honest, when I first heard about keycards, I thought it was going to be a good thing, and the reason I thought this was because I assumed they would be used sparingly and only meant as a replacement for the code in a box game. Because while game keycards are bad, this right here is even worse. While it sucks that keycards don't actually have the data on the cartridge, it is at the very least a better alternative to an empty plastic box with a slip of paper. And since the keycard does not lock to your system, it still has resale value and shareability, negating the two major drawbacks of code in a box games. And like I said, these physical game licenses are already happening on the other consoles, it just doesn't have a name. However, this positive outlook of mine quickly changed. Once pre-orders started going live for Switch 2 consoles and games, fans noticed that nearly every physical game release was a keycard. In fact, just 3 games out of the entire launch lineup are actually on the cartridge. These games are Mario Kart World, Cyberpunk 2077, and Rune Factory Guardians of Azuma. Everything else is a keycard. And just like that, every positive thought I had washed away. Code-in-a-box games were pretty rare on Switch 1. I had assumed keycards would be the same, but apparently not. Ironically, one of the only games that actually could be acceptable as a keycard is Cyberpunk. The game is so massive that it was probably not easy to fit it onto a cartridge. In a case like this, a keycard could become acceptable. If a developer is struggling to get the game onto a cart, I would certainly prefer a keycard over a code. But then you actually look at some of the games that ended up on a keycard, such as Bravely Default Flying Fairy HD Remaster, which is just 9 gigabytes. And yes, for those keeping track, it's an HD remake of a 3DS game, meaning it was already on a cartridge to begin with. And my favorite example has to be Puyo Puyo Tetris 2S, a measly 3 gigabytes not being put onto a cartridge. And just when you thought it couldn't get any worse, Switch 2's launch lineup also still had code-in-a-box games with Civ 7 and Split Fiction. So the only slight potential benefit I could have gleaned from this is gone too, because code-in-a-box games remains an option. I looked into this further, and as it turns out, the main problem here is that Nintendo is currently only offering 64GB cartridges for Switch 2. These are slightly more expensive than the carts you would see on Switch 1, cutting into the margins publishers have. So for this reason, there's actually a pretty big incentive for a smaller game to go the keycard route. If you're Sega, why in the world would you pay a premium for a 64GB cartridge that you're only going to fill 3GB of? With that new info, I can't even fault the publishers for this anymore. Nintendo should have found a way to offer better cartridge options instead of just accepting that 90% of their physical games library will be keycards. I think it was a huge misstep to allow this to become the standard, and they've been paying for it. Some statistics came out showing that despite the Switch 2's massively successful launch, third-party game sales were not keeping up. There's a lot of different factors for this, such as Nintendo consoles having a major first-party focus, and a lot of the Switch 2 third-party launch titles being older games that were already playable elsewhere. But I feel confident saying that the keycard situation played a role as well. I can speak from experience when I tell you that physical game collectors love a new console generation. It's really fun to start from scratch and begin building another new collection. This excitement can sometimes lead you to purchase games you may not have bought under normal circumstances. But in the case of Switch 2, a lot of physical collectors are refusing to buy keycard games. And while the number of physical game collectors may be smaller than it used to be, it's still a market worth catering to. I would even double down and say a console launch is the exact time to cater to them, since a physical game collector is more likely to be engaged enough in the gaming ecosystem to buy in on day one. So while I don't think keycards are entirely to blame for poor third-party sales, they definitely didn't help. There was a lot of talk leading into the Switch 2's launch about not supporting Nintendo's decision-making, and while those talks of a boycott fell flat when it came to the Switch 2 console or Mario Kart World's $80 price point, it does seem like the anger towards keycards was real and impactful. With this, I hoped we could get some progress and see publishers start to move away from them. At first, I thought we were on the right track, with Sega announcing Sonic Racing Cross Worlds would not be a game keycard, and would indeed have the full game on the cartridge. Considering Sega was one of the publishers who had gone all in on keycards, this seemed like great news, and ideally, a sign of things to come. But then, Nintendo held the Partner Showcase Direct on July 31st, 2025. I identified this show as a pretty pivotal moment for the keycard dilemma. This is in many ways the second wave of third-party games coming to Switch 2. They have had the lessons and statistics of launch in the back of their minds, and could have had time to change their plans, similar to what Sega did with Sonic Racing. But to my disappointment, nearly every game announced at this Partner Direct is being printed on a game keycard, continuing the trend of most third-party games not being on the cartridge. It's even more frustrating because many of those same games are also coming to Switch 1 and will be getting normal, traditional cartridge prints on that platform. And I gotta say, even for someone like me, this has pretty much killed any excitement I've had about collecting for Switch 2. It's been really deflating deflating, and in a lot of ways feels like the final straw as physical games desperately hold on to their relevancy. In the case of all three console manufacturers, I feel like they're beginning to enact policies that make collectors not want to buy in, almost daring you to still buy physical. It's as if they are trying to push us into their preferred digital future, and it leaves collectors in a really bad spot. Do you still collect new physical games even though your shelf will be half full of empty cartridges and discs? Or do you finally give in and just go fully digital? For the vast majority of people, the answer has been digital. And as more people come to that same conclusion thanks to all of the new barriers and annoyances that have been introduced, we will get ever closer to the outcome that scares me the most. I often wonder about a gaming ecosystem where physical games no longer exist. For a long time, I thought it would never happen, but with all three console manufacturers making it worse than ever to go physical, this change could happen sooner than we may think. Obviously that makes me sad simply because I enjoy physical games, but there is a much deeper problem here than that. My concern about a console generation that truly goes all digital is the level of control you are giving to these companies. It would be a reality where you really don't have much ownership over any of your games. The irony here is that most people probably wouldn't even notice or care. I mean, almost all other forms of media like movies, TV shows, and music have gone down this path already. No one is actually buying movies or music anymore. Everything is digital, and we're all tied to our subscription services. That is going to be the situation we find ourselves in with all digital consoles, and you can pretty clearly see why a console manufacturer would like that outcome. Another thing that concerns me with this is game pricing. One of the biggest reasons I still collect physical for modern consoles like PS5 is you can often find some pretty great deals. There have been so many times where I've gotten a physical game for $20 and then you check the PlayStation Store and it's still full price. If there was a time when physical games weren't an option and you had to go through the PlayStation Store, what's stopping them from just never putting the game on sale? It's not like you can get it anywhere else. Think about Steam and the PC ecosystem, which has essentially been all digital for quite some time. The big difference here is that the PC market is much less restricted. If Steam was hypothetically offering bad prices, people would eventually begin looking elsewhere, such as the Epic Games Store or whatever else. But if PlayStation is offering bad prices on the PlayStation Store of their all-digital console, where else are you gonna go? This is why I said in the intro that there is a reason to care about this issue, even if you don't buy physical games. I very much believe an all-digital future would be worse for all gamers, even those who have not touched a disc in years. And that's the main takeaway I hope you get from this video, regardless of where you stand on physical versus digital. I'm not asking you to begin buying physical games again if you don't want to, but just try to be aware of what's going on around you in this space, and think about how much control we are giving to these companies.